Chapter 4, Part 2 of the Spanish Conquerors by Irving, Berdine, Richman. Recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4, Cortes and Mexico. Mexico, Tenochtitlan, abode of the war god, the place of the stone and prickly pear, seat of the power of Montezuma, whereof the Spaniards had heard, under the name Julia, was a wonderful place to the Spaniard, but he failed to understand its real significance. What the Spaniard found in Mexico, as he believed, was merely a feudal monarchy under a king, supported by a nobility occupying palaces in a picturesque city full of mosques. In point of fact, Cortes unwittingly was looking across an abyss of perhaps 10,000 years, actually seeing the dead past live again. To say, remarks John Fiske, that it was like stepping back across the centuries to visit the Nineveh of Sennacherib or hundred-gated Thebes, is but inadequately to depict the situation, for it was a longer step than that. Yes, immeasurably longer, for it was a step from civilization quite to mid-barbarism. What it really was that Tenochtitlan disclosed to the Spaniards may perhaps be best conceived by the aid of a survey from the summit of one of the so-called mosques. The central valley of Mexico is a plateau some 7,400 feet above sea level, about 60 miles long by 40 broad, and surrounded by mountains. Here the waters, collected by drainage as in a basin, spread themselves out in three shallow lakes or lagoons, of which Chauco and Xochimilco are fresh, and Texcoco is salt, covering in all perhaps 442 square miles. Near the western side of Lake Texcoco are two marsh islands, and over them extends the community of Mexico Tenochtitlan, with its adjunct Tlatelolco. This community, which is not at all a city or municipality, is of about one-fourth the extent of the Mexico City of the present day, and harbors at this early time a population of perhaps 70,000 souls. Connection with the mainland is maintained by three long causeways, one to the north, one to the west, and one to the south, each 20 or 25 feet broad, and of a cement construction which is hard and smooth. These causeways, provided as they are with sluice gates, serve also as dikes for regulating the flow and depth of the water to the west of the islands, where it discharges from Chauco and Xochimilco, which are at a higher elevation than Texcoco. For similar control to the eastward of the islands, a long dike exists. Besides the three main causeways, there are certain tributary ones, and a double aqueduct of concrete bringing water from the mainland hill of Chapultepec. Turning now our gaze more directly beneath, we perceive first that the center of the main community, Tenochtitlan, is marked by a great square, 900 by 1,050 feet, facing the cardinal points, and surrounded by a stone wall 8 or 9 feet high, embellished with carved stone serpents. In this wall, on each side of the square, there is a gate, and each gate is approached from without by a broad avenue, those leading to the north, south, and west gates being prolongations of the causeways. By the square and avenues, the main community is divided into 4 quarters, the adjunct Tlatelolco constituting a 5th division, and each quarter is intersected by canals spanned by bridges. The great square in Tenochtitlan forms the place of trade and concourse, and in Tlatelolco a like square subserves the same. So far as buildings are concerned, they are of four principal sorts. First, huge communal dwellings; next, official edifices or tekpans; then armories, or houses of darts, as they are called; and lastly, temple structures, comprehending educational houses and quarters for priests. The material of all is a reddish stone, for the most part whitened to brilliance by stucco, and the foundations as a rule are pyramidal in shape. The great square is filled with temples, 20 at least, without counting the chief temple, and Tlatelolco also has its temples, a chief and lesser ones. If the hour of observation from our mosque be sunset, the picture will be charming. In the pale blue water sheet of Texcoco will be reflected, not alone the white buildings of Mexico Tenochtitlan, but those of other similar communities on the shores, the whole relieved against a dark blue sierra, crowned by the peaks, gigantic and roseate, of Iztaccíhuatl, White Woman, and Popocatépetl, Smoking Mountain. On the other hand, if we look at night, charm will be replaced by an aspect weirdly sinister. Spectral barks or canoes, 50,000 of them, it is said, will be darting athwart the lake and through the brazier lighted canals, while aloft the darkness will everywhere be pierced by temple flames. A modern smelting works, somewhat softened, might suggest the effect. Open daylight, however, will best reveal Mexico Tenochtitlan to the high-placed observer. By it, the communal dwellings will be seen to be of wide extent, but of only one or at most two stories; in the latter case receding or terraced, and provided with low parapets. The principal tekpans, of which there are two, one being in Tlatelolco, are surmounted by observation towers, and the pyramids of the temples are bulky structures of smooth stone, dented on one or more sides by steps, and culminating in wooden oratories. Terrible indeed is the religion of the Aztec Nahua. Its leading deity is Huitzilopochtli, god of war, and to him chiefly is consecrated the greatest pyramid of all. It stands in the broad square of Tenochtitlan. It is 300 feet wide on each side at the base, and with its oratories it rises to a height of 150 feet. Here, under one's very nostrils, as one gazes, reeks the blood of human sacrifices, blood offerings performed by filthy priests, who, in the curt phrase of Bernal Diaz, stink like sulphur and have another bad smell like carrion. A second great deity shares with the war god his ensanguined abode, Tezcatlipoca, god of the breath of life, the racial god of the Nahua. Near by are the temples of two other important gods, Tlaloc, a god of rain and fertility, and Quetzalcoatl, counterpart of the Maya Kukulkan, god of order, enlightenment, and humaneness, the blond and bearded god, the fair god of romance. But it is not merely the exteriors of houses that daylight in Tenochtitlan best reveals. Interiors respond to it even more. Here will be seen courts supplied with ponds and fountains, the abode in some instances of wild beasts and birds; chambers with floors and walls brought to a hard finish by cement and gypsum, and decked with featherwork hangings, mats and cushions, and provided with low canopied beds, low tables and stools, flint and copper implements, and of varied pottery. Between many of the buildings, too, are green garden plots, and in the lake floating vegetable gardens, and in the squares both of Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco huge markets in full tide of activity. Of much interest is all this, but obviously interest of a limited sort. What of the inner self of the Aztec? What of his soul? As disclosed by his religion, the soul of the Aztec is dark. War feeds it, and blood anoints it. But art is a second medium of soul disclosure, and through it the soul of the Aztec is revealed as not inhospitable to light and beauty. Of Aztec art, feather work is the most striking example, but metal work, flower culture, and poetry are also striking examples, especially flower culture and poetry. Campoala is a place of roses. Mexico Tenochtitlan is even more such a place. Roses peep above the parapets of the communal dwellings, and tecpans bloom in the chinampas, or floating gardens, depending garlands from the breasts of idols. No occasion is there that roses do not grace, be it festival, baptism, wedding, or funeral. And though the form of arrangement be oft that of the pyramid or the sacrificial mound, beauty veils the tragedy of the suggestion. When, therefore, the Aztec poet dreams and sings, it is flowers, roses for the most part, and other things of a flower-like fragility that he celebrates, hummingbirds, butterflies, songbirds, and precious stones. I wonder where I may gather some pretty sweet flowers. Whom shall I ask? Suppose that I ask the brilliant hummingbird. Suppose that I ask the yellow butterfly. They will tell me. I polished my noble new song like a shining emerald. I arranged it like the voice of the Tzinitzcan bird. I set it in order like the chant of the Zacuan bird. I mingled it with the beauty of the emerald, that I might make it appear like a rose bursting its bud. They led me within a valley to a fertile spot, a flowery spot, where the dew spread out in glittering splendor, where I saw lovely fragrant flowers, lovely odorous flowers, clothed with the dew. But even amid songs of rejoicing, rarely is there wanting the minor chord, the plaintive strain common to primitive man. Weeping, I, the singer, weave my songs of flowers of sadness. I lift my voice in wailing. I am afflicted as I remember that we must leave the beautiful flowers, the noble songs. Only sad flowers and songs are here in Mexico and Tlatelolco. Ohuaya, Ohuaya. The Spaniard, beholding Mexico Tenochtitlan with its adjunct Tlatelolco, failed to comprehend it, and his failure, save lately and in the case of a few persons, has been our own. The Mexico City or municipality of the Spaniard was in fact an Indian pueblo. It had been founded in 1325 by southward roving Indians, the Aztecs, a tribe few in number and near starvation. Finding the rich Mexican valley already occupied, the Aztecs took as their portion the two neighboring islands in Lake Texcoco, and devoted themselves to their principal need, the production of food, chiefly maize and cocoa. The tribe, in process of time, became fierce, bloody, and prosperous, and it was the struggle for food that made them so. This struggle for subsistence, indeed, is the key to Aztec life and institutions. To this struggle was it due that the inhabitants of Tenochtitlan planted gardens and invented the floating garden. To this was it due primarily that, feeling the need of controlling communication with the mainland, they built causeways which might be utilized as dikes. To this was it due that, feeling the need of a water supply and of an increased amount of food, they mustered courage and conquered portions of the mainland nearest to them. To this was it due that, growing in population and power and needing yet more food, they forced into existence a tripartite confederacy to levy contribution over an ever-widening area. To this was it due that, discovering the value of terror as a means of rule, they developed the ancient Maya Nahua cult of human sacrifice, at first practiced infrequently, into proportions at once colossal and revolting, and made Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, their local deity in chief. The Aztec tribe, as an organism in embryo, had but one head, a sachem or cacique, a civil leader. In him seemingly were combined dual elements, the above or masculine element and the below or feminine. With expansion and conflict came a need of differentiation of attributes, and there arose the war leader or chief of men. The distinctly masculine element was now embodied in him, the feminine being reserved to his associate, who henceforth bore the title, to many so puzzling, of Snake Woman. In the days of the Spanish conquest, the Snake Woman, though often alluded to, makes no particular figure. The three overshadowing figures are chiefs of men, Montezuma, Cuitlahuatzin, and Cuauhtemotzin. Of these, Montezuma is reflective and weak, the other two his successors decisive and strong. Just here, however, our account of Mexico Tenochtitlan must cease, for at the South Causeway, bowing, stands Cortes. He is come with some 400 men, 15 horses, and 7 light guns. The route by which he traveled from the 31st of August to the 15th of October has been from Xocotlan southwest to Tlascala, a community independent of Montezuma, yet distrustful of the Spaniard, and from Tlascala southwest to Cholula. From Cholula, in the valley or plain of Huitzilipan, the invaders have marched west to the mountain ridge connecting Popocatepetl with its mate, Yetzacuatla, and from here, early in November, have surveyed the basin-like valley of Mexico, with Mexico Tenochtitlan afar off amid the waters of Lake Texcoco. They have then approached the border of Lake Chalco, traversed a causeway leading to a peninsula, Iztapalapan, and now in the community of Iztapalapan itself stand dazed before the stonework, the woodwork of cedar and other sweet-scented trees, the orchard and garden full of roses and fruit trees, and the pond of fresh water with birds of many kinds and breeds. To Bernal Diaz and his followers, touched with the spirit of Spanish romanticism, the scene appears as the enchantments of the legend of Amadis. In the mind of Montezuma, meanwhile, the grave question has been, can these Spaniards, these strangers of the sunrise, be gods? When Grillalva's expedition appeared off the coast in 1518, it had been reported to Tenochtitlan that in the waters of heaven, as the open sea was called, floating towers had appeared, from which had descended beings with white faces and hands, with beards and long hair, and wearing raiment of brilliant colors and round head coverings. Could these beings be priests or heralds of the fair god Quetzalcoatl, come, according to the Maya Nahua tradition, to resume sway over his people? Before proof could be adduced, Grillalva had departed, and then shortly had come swift messengers with news of Cortes, and with pictures of his floating towers, and of his fair-visaged yet bearded attendants, handling the thunder and bestriding fierce creatures that spurned the ground. Proof regarding the quality of the fair strangers was required now more than ever, and so the first embassy had been sent to Cortes, the embassy that had carried back, as a specimen of the round head coverings of the strangers, the gilt helmet. This contrivance, as it chanced, resembled the head coverings of the Aztec gods, and especially of Huitzilopochtli, god of war. So there had been sent to Cortes the second embassy, bringing the headdresses of Quetzal feathers. Now these headdresses were those of the 4 principal gods of the Aztecs: Tezcatlipoca, god of the breath of life; Huitzilopochtli, god of war; Tlaloc, god of fertility; and Quetzalcoatl, the fair or culture god. What they seemingly were meant to signify to Cortes was that Montezuma, tentatively at any rate, was willing to acknowledge the former as, like himself, entitled to wear them, as a representative of the gods. Nor was this all that the wonderful gifts of the second embassy were meant to signify. Among the gifts, as will be remembered, were two great wheels, one of gold and one of silver. All Indians of America possess a social system more or less fully worked out from the heavenly spaces, the four quarters or cardinal points of direction, and the three regions, above, below, and center. The four headdresses, symbolizing the four principal gods, may therefore be conceived as meant to stand to Cortes for the four quarters, and the gold and silver wheels, respectively, for the above and the below. Something of this kind almost certainly was symbolized by the gifts which, besides being in the nature of a bribe to the Spaniard as a human being to depart, were likewise in the nature of a propitiatory offering to him as a god, or at least a high priest, to be merciful. Whether or not the Spaniards really possessed preternatural attributes, it has vastly puzzled all Mexico to decide. The Cempoalans had industriously spread the idea that they did, and one thing only had served to detract from the claim. At Tlascala, where the matter had been put to a test, some of the Spanish horses, those creatures of terror, had been killed, hacked apart, and triumphantly devoured at feasts. At Cholula, however, Cortes, by the cleverness of Marina, had with unerring precision alighted upon an Aztec plot to destroy him, had, as the marvelling Cholulans expressed it, read their very minds and thoughts, and such power could pertain to gods alone. But to come back to the Spanish leader as he stands, bowing at the South Causeway outside of Itzapalapan, whether he be divine or human, it has become apparent that his entry into Tenochtitlan can no longer be prevented by gifts nor thwarted by guile. Montezuma, therefore, making a virtue of necessity, is about to come forth to greet him. Not that machinations have ceased at all. Once the Spaniards are beyond the drawbridges, with retreat cut off, once securely lodged in one of the principal tecpans, it is the purpose of the chief of men counselled thereto by the dire Huitzilopochtli himself, to destroy the invaders utterly, and to send them in batches to the Great Pyramid as a savory and acceptable blood offering. The point where the ceremonies incident to the meeting of Montezuma with Cortes are to take place is on the South Causeway at Acachenanco, a causeway junction, and here a great crowd is gathered. It would seem that not alone is Tenochtitlan a settlement of four divisions, but that Aztec territory as such, outside of Tenochtitlan, partakes of the same plan, for at the causeway junction Cortes is received by four Aztec sub-chiefs from Texcoco, Itztapalapan, Tacuba, and Coyoacan, settlements on the lake shore to the northeast, southeast, northwest, and southwest, respectively, of Tenochtitlan. The lake is crowded with observers in canoes, but the causeway itself, the present Calzada de Itztapalapan, is kept clear, and down the vista which it forms rises Mexico, full of mystery. The four sub-chiefs conduct the Spaniards to the point where the South Causeway merges in the South Avenue, the present street El Rastro, leading to the great square, and here Montezuma appears in person. He comes, reclining in a sumptuous litter borne upon the shoulders of attendants. At sight of Cortes he descends, and there is spread above him a baldaquin of light greenish blue feathers with fringe of gold, pearls, and jade. He is a man about 52 years old, tall, slender, and of dignified mien, and his hair is worn short over the ears. His garb is a robe of radiant blue and gold, and his feet are shod with golden sandals. Is it as priest of Huitzilopochtli that he thus presents himself to Cortes, the possible representative of that other deity, the fair god Quetzalcoatl, waiting to dispossess him? Be that as it may, the four sub-chiefs, habited likewise in heavenly blue, advance to his support. Dignitaries bearing tripartite wands, symbolizing the authority of the Confederacy, go before him, while attendants sweep clean the highway, and even lay carpets that the golden sandals may not touch the ground. As Montezuma draws near, Cortes dismounts from his horse and steps forward. Montezuma kisses the earth, an act performed by pressing it with the hand and then carrying the hand to the lips, and offers to Cortes, "How much of Mexico is here?" "A bunch of roses." The Spanish leader moves to salute Montezuma by an embrace, but is restrained by a gesture, and instead places about his neck a necklace of beads taken from his own person. Throughout the ceremony the sides of the avenue are lined with attending sages, all of whom are barefoot, and to none of whom is it permitted to raise the eyes to Montezuma, the man of great medicine, the high priest. When the Spaniards entered Mexico, it was November 8, 1519. Between this date and the beginning of 1520, Cortes and his men found lodgings in the halls and chambers of the Tecpan, the official house or council lodge in the great square near the great temple, formerly the quarters of Montezuma himself, but now vacated to accommodate the Spaniards, Montezuma having taken up new quarters in one of the vast communal dwellings. Here Cortes made himself secure by placing cannon to command the approaches, and here he was received in audience by Montezuma, who, causing him to be seated on a very rich platform in a chamber facing a court, embellished with fountains and flowers, addressed him thus: "We believe that our race was brought to these parts by a lord, whose vassals they all were, and to return to his native country. And we have always believed that his descendants would come to subjugate this country and us as his vassals. And according to the direction from which you say you come, which is where the sun rises, and from what you tell us of your great lord or king who has sent you here, we believe and hold for certain that he is our rightful sovereign." Early fruits of the occupation of the Tecpan by Cortes were the discovery by accident of the walled-up storeroom containing the official treasure of the Aztec government, that Aladdin's cave whence had come the gold and silver wheels, the burning alive of certain Aztec plotters, and the seizure of the person of the chief of men, who, transferred to the Tecpan, became, under Castilian tutelage, the tool and mouthpiece of his captor. During 1520 complications for the invaders arose. Cortes contrived the seizure of the war chiefs of Texcoco and Tlacopan, subheads of the Aztec tripartite confederacy, and of the war chiefs of Coyohuacan and Iztapalapan, two of the four subheads of the Aztec district itself. Then further he forbade human sacrifices. By both these acts he stored up trouble for himself, trouble, furthermore, developed independently from without. Diego Velazquez, governor of Cuba and adelantado of the lands over which Cortes was exercising sway, had at length organized a strong expedition under Panfilo de Narvaez, a man of hollow voice, to assert his authority. Narvaez reached San Juan de Ulloa in April and secretly got into relations with Montezuma. In order to check him, Cortes was compelled to divide his own small command. Leaving 140 men under Pedro de Alvarado in Tenochtitlan, he marched forth with 92 men in May, and before the end of the month had near Cempoala met his foe, defeated him, and made him prisoner. Meanwhile in Tenochtitlan, Alvarado, impetuous by nature and roused by tales of conspiracy among the Aztecs, fostered by the coming of Narvaez, set upon the population while engaged in celebrating the festival of the god Tezcatlipoca, and slaughtered them without discrimination and without ruth. Stunned by the onslaught, but rallying promptly, the Mexicans fiercely assaulted the Tecpan, where the Spaniards were housed, and held them in a state of siege till Cortes, informed of their plight by secret messengers, was able to return to their relief. Food was running short, and Montezuma, being appealed to, induced Cortes to liberate the war chief of Iztapalapan, Cuitlahuatzin by name, that he might calm the people and procure it. This was the beginning of the end of the official character of Montezuma. Cuitlahuatzin was henceforth recognized by the clans as chief of men, and led the Mexicans in desperate attempts to force the Spaniards out of Tenochtitlan. It was now late June, and departure from the lake settlement became imperative for Cortes. In vain did the Spaniards, in a hand-to-hand struggle, drive the Aztecs from the dizzy summit of the pyramid in the great square. In vain did Montezuma appeal to his countrymen from the roof of the Tecpan. The chief of men, no longer such, was reviled to his face. Nay, more, was assailed by missiles and stricken in the forehead. Within 3 days he was dead, and on the 4th at midnight his erstwhile jailers stole silently from the Tecpan into the avenue leading west to the Tacuba causeway, shortest of the 3 routes to the mainland, and interrupted by the fewest sluice ways. At first, undetected, they had nearly gained the causeway head, when the night silence re-echoed to a cry, the shriek of a native woman. A signal drum on the pyramid in Tlatelolco at once boomed forth a warning, and secrecy was at an end. It was the Noche Triste, the doleful night. The bridges over the sluiceways were gone, and could not be quickly replaced. Men, horses, and booty, smitten in rear and flank, filled the chasms in a tangled mass. Cortes himself got over by the greatest difficulty. Alvarado, it is said, cleared one of the chasms by an unparalleled vaulting leap. Velasquez de Leon and Francisco de Morla fell, to emerge no more. Of the total force of Spaniards, 1,250 men since the capture of Narvaez, some 450 were missing. 24 horses survived the catastrophe, but the significance of this fact was now small. Neither white stranger nor horse was any longer preternatural. Both were proven mortal. Both could perish. Cortes, after all, was not the fair god Quetzalcoatl, was not even his priest. He was not divine in any sense, just human, just lustful, a dissembling conqueror of flesh and blood. Once on the mainland, the Spaniards were able to stay somewhat the Aztec pursuit, and though, as Cortes expressed it, without a horse that could run, or a horseman who could lift an arm, or a foot soldier who could move, he finally managed to round Lake Texcoco on the north, and so, after a fierce melee at Otumba on the 7th of July, to reach friendly and sheltering Tlascala. Among the saved, besides Alvarado, were Gonzalo de Sandoval, Cristobal de Olid, and the indispensable Marina and Aguilar. The capture of Tenochtitlan and the reduction of the Aztecs to submission were still as much as ever the objects of Cortes, and he resumed the task sturdily in spite of his temporary check. His forces he rested and augmented. Surrounding peoples he coerced or conciliated. The road to Vera Cruz he put under guard. Disaffection in his own ranks, due to the presence of so many of Narvaez's men, he quieted by soothing eloquence. At length, on the 28th of December, all was ready. Texcoco was occupied, and 13 vessels, shallow barges, which, after the manner of Balboa in Darien, had been constructed in the forest, were carried in pieces across the mountains and launched on Texcoco Lake. Between March and May 1521, the Spaniards seized Iztapalapan and other points, and during May and June Cortes, with 900 Spaniards and thousands of native allies, 86 horses, and 18 guns, began a systematic siege of Tenochtitlan by land and water. Many were the advances and repulses. The Aztecs resisted, not alone with determination, but with the utmost fury. They cut the great dike. They converted every canal into a moat. They made of every house a castle. Taunts and challenges, no less than missiles, they flung across the water and down the converging avenues. By night, captive Spaniards, goaded to the top of the Tlatelolco pyramid, were spectacularly slaughtered in the glow of sacrificial fires. Spanish valor did much toward the reduction of the great community of the lake, but famine and wholesale demolition of buildings did more, and on the 13th of August the chief of men, Cuauhtemotzin, doughty successor of Cuitlahuatzin, who had died of smallpox before the siege, surrendered in despair his own person and what remained of his nation. So fell Mexico Tenochtitlan. Fortunate was it for Cortes that in 1519 it was Montezuma who held in Mexico the position of chief of men. Had it been otherwise, had this position been held by Cuitlahuatzin or Cuauhtemotzin, it may be doubted whether the sun myth of the fair god and his impending return would have been permitted to paralyze action. In a sense far from fanciful, Montezuma, sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, was the Hamlet of the Aztecs. Chapter 5